My name is Mona Sahaf, Deputy Director of the Reshaping Prosecution Project here at the Vera Institute. And I myself am a former prosecutor, and I'd love to share a little bit about you all about how I came to Vera and why it is that I do this work. So my family hails from Indian-occupied Kashmir, which is a highly militarized area where the rule of law is not upheld, where there has been no accountability over decades, intergenerationally, for years of countless acts of violence, and where violence is frequently employed by the state against the people of Kashmir. So, as an immigrant to this country, I saw the United States, as many do, as a beacon of hope and a place where the rule of law prevailed and where accountability was real and due process was a fundamental right. And I came to law school and became a prosecutor thinking that I would have the best of all worlds. I would be able to help those who had been harmed. I would be able to help those who caused harm, and I would be able to seek justice in each and every case before me. But over my decade plus as a prosecutor, I soon realized that prosecutors are really last responders, that when the social contract is broken down in terms of joblessness and poverty, housing instability, security in your neighborhoods, education, recreational opportunities for our youth, in terms of all those systems, when they break down, those are the problems, all of society's ills brought to the prosecutor's door, and prosecutors are told that they are the ones assigned to deal with these problems. And in my work, the racial disparities in who is brought into the system were very clear. And I was sick of being a last responder and working with a very limited toolbox, which essentially included punishment and state supervision. And I found frequently in case after case that the tools that I had been provided were actually causing more harm than doing good. So that is why I left DOJ and came here to Vera to start working on the important system change that's happening with reform prosecutors and advocates around the country. So for those of you who don't know about Vera, I want to tell you a little bit about the Vera Institute of Justice. Vera has been around for 60 years, and we've always had a foot in the criminal justice reform space. Always working with impacted communities, but also with state actors in full recognition of the fact that those are the people who can cause systemic change and who can have immediate impact. And when it comes to criminal justice reform, we obviously recognize that the prosecutors are the ones with vast power and largely unchecked power when it comes to the criminal justice system. At Vera, we are working with those prosecutors who run on platforms of change and reform to reimagine what the role of the prosecutor is and recalibrate the way that we measure the success of prosecutors. Gone, we hope, are the days of measuring prosecutors' successes by the number of cases they charge and the number of felony convictions obtained and the years of incarceration exacted on communities. Rather, and instead, we are measuring progress of prosecutors by the number of cases that are moved out of the criminal system into diversion, by the number of cases that are actually fully kept out of the system and never charged in the first place. So how do we do that at the Reshaping Prosecution program here at Vera? We provide technical assistance to prosecutors by way of education and work with their line prosecutors. We do data collection and analysis and look at the stories that are revealed from the data, often in terms of the racial disparities that they show. And we help prosecutors implement reforms that are data-driven and that suit the needs of that particular office after our analysis. And we are driven always by three core principles: addressing mass incarceration, addressing the racial disparities in the criminal justice system, and helping to make prosecutors' offices more accountable to the communities that they serve. Traditionally, prosecutors' offices have been black boxes, and none of us really knew, those in the community outside of the prosecutors and the defense counsel and those involved really did not know how the decisions are being made inside these offices. So the data and accountability piece, we believe, is crucial to ensuring that those communities that are most impacted know what is happening in their local prosecutors' offices, know what the data collection is and what it shows, and can use that information, use that power to hold elected prosecutors responsible, and so that prosecutors can hold themselves accountable to what their decisions are and what impact they have, particularly on Black and Brown communities. We are here today for this conference because at this moment, after years of the reform prosecuting movement being off the ground, where we see more prosecutors running on platforms of change, and we see the re-election of some reform-minded prosecutors, it's an appropriate time to take a pause and reflect upon what our successes have been, what some of the lessons are that we can model out to other parts of the nation and other prosecutors, and also to be thinking about what our challenges and our setbacks have been. In particular, we're very excited over the next 2 days of panels to be thinking about the role that media plays in shaping narratives around crime, public safety, and the prosecution reform movement. We're also very interested in highlighting, with the use of our media experts who will be moderating our panels over the next few days, the very particularized and genderized backlash there has been against Black female prosecutors who are the pioneers of this movement, and hopefully to ask ourselves some questions about why these stories aren't being further amplified. I'm now going to recap the schedule for you. I hope no one's multitasking and planning to miss any part of this, but in case it helps, our first panel will be starting shortly after welcoming remarks. Panel 1, a discussion of what led to the progressive prosecution movement and why reforming the system from within is so crucial. This will run for 1 hour, followed by 30 minutes of Q&A, and then a 15-minute break. Our second panel begins this afternoon at 3:15 p.m., Progress and Pushback, a discussion about judicial intervention, recall efforts, ethic complaints, and a coordinated campaign of attacks that confronts reform-minded prosecutors. And we will conclude today shortly before 5 p.m. Tomorrow, our second and final day of our virtual conference will again begin around 1 p.m. with our third panel, Resistance to Progress, the Role of Race and Gender, where we hope to do a deep dive into the racialized and genderized backlash aimed at Black women prosecutors who are leading the reform movement to change the system. And following that third and final panel, we are very excited to invite you all into a series of workshops. You will have the choice to join the one of your choosing, and they will be focused on legal, on media, and community engaged responses, because at Vera, along with our partners in the movement, we are always interested in crafting solutions and hopefully piloting those solutions and learning from the discussion that we expect to happen over the next 2 days. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand the virtual mic over to Nick Turner, Vera's president and director. So over to you, Nick.
So, hi, I'm Nick Turner. I'm here against all the odds, and I wanted to just say welcome and to thank you, Mona, for your introduction. Sorry about the technical glitches. There have been teams of people at Vera working for years and years to figure out how to keep me out of the room. This team is so good that they actually succeeded for a bit. And so I congratulate them. In all seriousness, I want to say what a pleasure it is for me to be able to welcome everyone here to this very special occasion, to this conference, which I think is seminal. You may be wondering, well, what do we mean by reimagining prosecution? And I think it's important for us to ask that question and think about it at this particular moment in time when in our newspapers, in the news, in social media, what we are seeing once again, and at a level that we haven't seen in years, is the concern about crime, the spike in homicides and non-fatal shootings. We are hearing these stories more and more, and that is the context in which we are trying to discern what it means to reimagine prosecution. And it is so important that to recognize that we don't hear stories that always reflect reality. People may indeed be worried about crime more than they have been in the last 20 years, when crime rates are significantly higher. And so what we have here is still low crime rates, a spike of attention that is being politicized, and that is reaping fear. And so I think not only are we trying to reimagine prosecution, but we know that we need to expand our own imaginations about what prosecution can do. So America needs to reimagine how it thinks about public safety. I don't think that I need to say that to everyone in this room. I think people know that that the incarceration of millions of people has not led to healthy and safe communities. The so-called tough on crime policies that have been in place for decades have devastated families, gutted communities, and reinforced racist outcomes. And so for the criminal legal system to truly deliver justice, the public needs to hear stories that center that history, that place long-term security above the fear that is being that is being triggered now, and focus on accountability. We live in a time when the role of the media in providing such clarity is more important than ever. And so that's why we've worked so hard to bring together some of the brightest minds in media here and in prosecution to discuss what it means to tell not old stories, but new stories that are grounded in data, and in what we need to do to ensure that these stories indeed resonate for a public. So with us today, not only do we have leaders in media, we also have leaders in the prosecution space who have made changes in policy that put the health and welfare of their communities first. One of the people who is in our Zoom room right now is DA Rachel Rollins. Rachel, I want to congratulate you on your nomination today to be U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. We're proud and honored of you, and honored to be with you, and proud of the work that you've done. And when you look at all of these leaders, like Rachel and many others who have joined us here today, you might call the changes dramatic. You might label them progressive, but what they really are is the result of decades of collective work, not just of the leaders who are here, but people who have been advocates, people in community who have been calling for change, who have sought to make racial equity central in their work. We at Vera are committed to that. We eagerly participate in advancing this cause, and actually just this last month, we proudly announced 10 new partners in our Motion for Justice campaign, many of whom who are here today. So thank you for stepping up into this very important work with us. We have much to do. We have much to do because the traditional view of prosecution is changing. We have much more data, many more studies, and most significantly, we have a vision to end mass incarceration and racial inequity. Yet we still hear, as I mentioned at the top, the same stories that stoke fear in communities, stories that focus on the daily sensational crime rather than overall trends, and then the progress that has been made by many of the folks who are with us here today. These stories suggest that without police and harsh penalties, the crime rate will surge, despite little evidence to support that claim. So that's the space that we're in and the challenge that is before us. And those of us who are working here to reimagine prosecution have to meet that challenge head on. The conversations today and our workshops tomorrow are a necessary next step in changing that public narrative and creating a space for new criminal legal system that is centered on community well-being, accountability, and justice. We have our work to do. Before that work begins, I want to just briefly pause and extend a very special thank you to Miller and Chevalier, and to Professor Angela Jordan Davis, who served on the planning committee, and the panelists who are who are lending their time and leading us and sharing their expertise on these very important conversations. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us, and I look forward to this fantastic agenda.
I guess I'll just jump in here. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Topher Sanders. I'm a reporter with ProPublica, but I have the privilege to host the first panel of the conference. And so the way we'll do this is I'm going to have a short intro for the panel, and then we'll jump into discussion, but I'll give you just a little framework. We'll talk for about an hour, but then we'll open it up to Q&A. You'll be able to write down your questions through the chat mechanism, and they'll be filtering those questions in when we get to the Q&A section, and that's how we'll run the Q&A. But without further ado, I'm gonna jump into this intro, and then I'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll start this amazing conversation. So, as you heard from the first two speakers here, prosecutors play a critical role in our criminal legal system. So, without question, a key part of the role that prosecutors should be playing haven't played as much as many people believe, but part of that role is to right wrongs and correct biases and to correct abusive policies. Prosecutors have virtually unchecked, discretion to decide who enters the system. Also, significant influence over what happens to those people once they're actually in the criminal system. Prosecutors can perpetuate the unjust values and virtues of the system, or they can help to rectify them. For decades, whether a prosecutor was successful or not depended purely on how many people they could put in jail and how long they could put them in jail, seeking convictions and not seeking justice. This kind of race to convictions, this contest for lengthy sentences, those are key factors in the mess we find ourselves in with our incarceration system, which everyone knows is disproportionately crushed Black and Brown communities. Today's conversation, and really the conference as a whole, is about the movement to reprioritize justice, seeking justice, not seeking convictions. With all that said, let's introduce this incredible panel. So when I say your name, you can give a little wave there for everybody. So first, and this is in no particular order, we have Simone Levine. She's worked as the executive director for Court Watch NOLA for the last 6 years. She and her team work to ensure constitutional rights, victim rights, transparency, and fairness in New Orleans Parish criminal courts. Before monitoring criminal courts, Simone monitored the New Orleans Police Department in the Office of Independent Police Monitor. Simone has worked as a prosecutor, a private defense attorney, a public defender, criminal justice police counsel, and law professor. So next we have Sutana Deberry. She is the elected district attorney for Durham County in North Carolina. As district attorney, she has prioritized the prosecution of serious offenses. She's implemented policies to reduce unnecessary pretrial incarceration and court involvement, and worked to improve trust and equity in the courts. Prior to becoming a DA, Sutana worked as a criminal defense attorney in her hometown of Hamlet, North Carolina. She was a general counsel for North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services and an executive director of the nonprofit North Carolina Housing Coalition. Welcome, Sutana. Next, we have Jami Hodge. She's the director of the Reshaping Prosecution Initiative at the Vera Institute of Justice. She's the reason many of us are here, and she's been at Vera since April 2018. Prior to joining Vera, she served for 12 years as an assistant United States attorney in Washington, D.C. And also, she was a senior advisor in the DOJ Office of Legal Policy and an advisor in the White House Office of VP during the Obama administration. And one thing that I really think is amazing about this conference, and something that I hope everyone will take full advantage of and listen to keenly, is that not only do you have the people who are working in the system and people, prosecutors and defense attorneys, but also prioritized voice of part of this conference are the people who have been impacted by these systems and by the legal criminal justice system. And so it's with great honor that I introduce you to Sybil Fox and Robert Richardson. They're affectionately known by most people as Fox and Rob. They are a New Orleans-based couple who endured and survived 21 years as an incarcerated family. Their story has been seen by millions through the critically acclaimed documentary from 2020 called Time, which is available on Amazon Prime. And if that weren't enough, they also work tirelessly with their organization, PDM NOLA, where they teach citizens that legal awareness is the best form of defense against abusive legal systems. So that's the incredible panel. And I'm going to start with our first question, which is going to go to Jami. So, Jami, how have prosecutors traditionally related to or dealt with the community, and how has that changed in recent years?
Thank you, Topher. And it's great to be here. We're so grateful to all the people who are joining us for this important conversation. I think traditionally, people paid very little attention to their elected prosecutor. Even now, 80% of prosecutors run unopposed. And even now, 95% of elected prosecutors are white. And I don't think that most people even know that their prosecutor, who has a ton of power and influence on what happens in their local criminal justice system, is someone that's elected, that they have some say in who that person is. And so because of this dynamic, prosecutors have had very little community engagement and certainly little community accountability for the policies and practices that they have in place. Mona mentioned this in her opening remarks, but largely people think of what happens in prosecutors' offices as a black box. You know, decisions come out, people are charged or not, mandatory minimums are sought or not, and there's very little explanation or reason, and they don't have to give them. They can just make the decisions. And what is exciting is that this dynamic is beginning to change. What we've seen really since 2015 is prosecutors begin to run on and win on platforms that are very different than the traditional platform. So even in prosecutor elections, many places across the country, what you'll find is a prosecutor who says, elect me because I win 95% of my trials. Elect me because I get 20-year sentences, 30-year sentences on these violent crimes. And now what we're seeing instead are prosecutors who run and say, I understand that mass incarceration is a problem. I understand that much of what comes into the system should not be here, and I'm going to work to end that. I see the racial disparities in the system, and I'm going to make it my platform to do everything I can in my power to address them. I'm not going to be a black box. I'm going to be public with my policies and the ways that I'm making decisions so that there can be that accountability. And I think a lot of this change has been driven by community demanding something different from the role, catalyzed by the number of Black people killed at the hands of law enforcement and community members going to prosecutors in many jurisdictions across this country and trying to figure out what was going to happen in response to that. And I think that community organization and beginning to engage, there was also this learning period of, wait, this person does more than just decide whether or not a police officer is charged. They make a lot of decisions, and recognizing then that if they weren't getting the appropriate response, that they could do something about it and organize and get that person out and get someone in who truly does reflect their values. So we're in a different time when it comes to how prosecutors relate to communities. Because the other piece to me that is interesting is not just getting them elected, prosecutors on different platforms of change, but the way we see those same community members continue to engage. In Contra Costa County, California, where Dinah Becton's the first Black woman to be elected to that office, the same amazing coalition of community organizers who helped get her elected then reorganized themselves into a DA accountability roundtable. And they meet with her monthly to continue to engage with her around policy and practice change. So there's definitely been a change. There's still a ton of work to do because that's not what happens in most prosecutors' offices around the country. But I think we're at the start of something important.
Thank you for that. Fox and Rob, talk to us about how this traditional tough on crime kind of approach to communities that prosecutors have had for a long time. How has that, harmed communities, especially Black and brown folks?
Oh, wow. Topher, one, I would have to start off by saying that we are so honored to be able to be here and to be able to have this conversation. So hats off to the Vera Institute for being able to bring about this very important dialogue in this moment. And thank you, Jami, for reaching out and having us to be a part. One of the things that I think is one of the biggest symbols of our time, if you ask me, and I say one of the biggest symbols of our time, is because Time, our movie, was the most honored documentary of 2020. And I think that the representation of the power of a prosecutor is vividly displayed in our story about how you get people who are in charge, and instead of them using their power for the greater good of the whole community, they allow their egos to get in the way, or biases get in the way, and then they make decisions that have long-term rippling effects. In our family's matter, you talk about a 2-decade-long effect. So I think that, you know, just initially, my family, we didn't know anything about how the system worked until 1997, when we entered into it. And then it's like you get a quick crash course. You got to learn all the players, you got to learn all the games, you even have to learn an entire new language when you are just become a justice involved citizen. And so all of that thrown at you at one time, you're at the mercy of the courts and those that are the decision makers, the gatekeepers. Many times over and over again, we see that they use their position to excessively harm people through the choices that they make. What I discovered myself was that what had happened to my family by being sentenced to 60 years in prison for a property crime of taking $5,134 was that we were not the exception to the rule, but that this was a normal practice throughout the state of Louisiana. And as we studied it more, Rob and I discovered, whoa, it's not just the old dirty South. Man, they're doing this all over the country. And if you look even further, you can say, man, they are doing it all over this world. And so I think that just being able to understand that there is a problem that exists there, and the potential to really change this entire system just by focusing on one person, the prosecutor. So again, I just want to say thank you for having this conversation, letting us continue this conversation, seeing where other people are going and what they are doing, and how it is that we can change the system ourselves. Rob?
I would have to piggyback on something that you made mention of.
You know, we don't do pigs no more. They say you have to do.
To what Topher mentioned earlier, when you said that when it comes to our district attorneys, our prosecutors, that in essence you got one or two tasks that are before you. Either one, you're going to perpetuate what has already been going on, or you're going to work to rectify it. As this panel is drawn together with hopes that we would be able to focus more on the latter, and that is bringing some rectifying a lot of the ills and the wrongs that have happened, and that have happened for more than 400 years now. I mean, a lot of times, again, we like to act as if though slavery is not real. And as practitioners of law, which prosecutors are, I'm sure that they all are aware that the 13th Amendment is real, and that in the event that one is convicted to a crime, he can be forced, or she can be forced back into slavery or indentured servitude. So either you are perpetuating what has been going on for over 400 years in our country, or you're going to work to rectify those particular things. We're not lynching each other from trees and those types of things in the numbers that we have been doing in the past, but we are lynching people daily in our courtroom systems, and we're doing it with time. Our family was sentenced to more than 60 years, as my wife mentioned, for a property crime, for taking money, $5,000 worth of money for the most part, but yet I was sentenced to some 60 plus years for a first offense armed robbery in a case where Stevie Wonder could have seen that this is definitely not a case where this guy is the worst of the worst. But instead, our prosecutor chose to sidestep those mitigating and other circumstances that were there, and chose to seek greater punishment. With that being said, as a person that was wanting to take responsibility for my own crime, as I had pled guilty from the onset, showing my willingness to take responsibility for what I had done, and them sidestepping all of that to put in place a 60-year sentence amounted to
Death by
excessive sentence,
incarceration.
because it amounted to death by incarceration, as Fox may mention, under the previous crime bills that exist during the Clinton administration. Truth in sentencing laws came out, and as a result of it, people that were sentenced to crimes of violence were forced to do 85% of any time that had been issued to them. And when you look at the laundry list of what can actually fall up under our violent crime statute, I mean, you got crimes where people don't even have to touch people or whatever, and then you can actually,
In
be
Louisiana.
convicted of a violent crime, and hence you would have to do 85% of whatever sanction is thrown your way. With that being said, the fact that over some 20 odd years in the film, you can see that Fox was fighting back and forth with our district attorneys and so forth, trying to rectify our situation, and yet still, with all of what had been presented before them, they were still continuing to perpetuate what had already been going, for quite some time prior to. So what we're hopeful to is that not only this panel, but our involvement in this discussion is that we can move our prosecutors toward rectifying a lot of the ills and the wrongdoings that have happened either in previous administrations or even under their own administration, but rectifying these matters. It's not an option, it's something that must be done. It's something that has to be done.
If we can use the prosecutor's power to immediately throw someone into prison when they have committed an offense, at whatever point we see that that sentence that they have received or that judgment that they have received is no longer be suiting, then we should immediately move to rectify it as well. The same with the innocence claim. We have multiple cases in Louisiana where we know we've done something wrong, and instead of us just moving as expeditiously as we do when we take someone in the system, I mean, you don't get to say goodbye. You don't get to make a phone call. If they want you, they come get you. So if we can do it that swiftly going in the system, then our prosecutors should be able to use their power as swiftly to remove people from the system when those sanctions are no longer needed for folks. So it is definitely an interesting conversation that we're having here today about the power of the prosecutor. But I just want to remind all of us that nobody's power is more powerful than our own.
Amen. Amen. Simone, so that brings it back, bringing it back to the power that we have as communities, as people. Talk to us about, what role does community organizing play? Has it played in the movement of electing a new kind of prosecutor? And how do those same groups then hold those new prosecutors accountable for many of the things they say leading up to election? How do we do that?
So thanks so much, Topher. I just want to say, first of all, that I am so honored to be on this panel with so many giants. I've been, of course, knowing about Satana's work for a long, long time and inspired about it and inspired with it. But I also really wanted to do a plug for Fox and Rob, who are my fellow New Orleanians, and their movie Time. It is essential that absolutely everybody watch this film. Oftentimes we're not very good at promoting ourselves, so I'm going to promote them for them, and talk a little bit about what it looked like as far as our reform movement and our push. So I'm going to quote Nick, who had spoken to us earlier when he talked about the decades of collective work that this takes and how difficult it is because the work is continual. It never stops. Court Watch NOLA is a group, that's the group that I lead, that trains about 150 people in a year on what the criminal courts do. I think Nick was mentioning how this work comes with decades of collective work, and that was definitely true with with our former prosecutor, Leon Canizero, who was in charge in New Orleans for more than a decade. And, Court Watch NOLA is a group that trains over 150 volunteers in a year. And we believe that there's a conspiracy between the insiders and the outsiders in the system. And the outsiders of the system are criminal defendants. They are crime survivors. They are jurors. They are us as community. And the insiders are prosecutors and police and judges and those people that make up the system. And a lot of the times the people on the inside of the system don't even understand the problems that they're working with. And it really takes us as outsiders to point it out. And so about 3 years ago, Court Watch NOLA raised an issue. We work with a lot of whistleblowers. We collect data in the courts and then we publish it in reports. And we brought about a campaign against our prosecutor for incarcerating crime survivors. So specifically a rape crime survivor who was incarcerated for 9 days when she was too scared to come to court and testify. And so the raising that awareness and then raising later on that our prosecutor was serving witnesses and crime survivors with pieces of paper he called subpoenas, which threatened more jail time and more fines and fees. We brought this awareness. It happened locally, it happened nationally, it was in the national press for months, and even internationally it came about. And so as a result, we have this prosecutor who was in charge. When I say he was powerful, he was not only powerful in his office, and as Fox and Rob had mentioned, that there was and Jami before, it was a black box. Nobody could get in. Nobody could make an impact. Nobody could make a change. But it was even more than that. He was in charge of our political machines, and so anybody that our prosecutor endorsed became elected. He was really that powerful. And so when we brought out the awareness that he was incarcerating crime survivors on top of all the other things that he was doing, and the high number of crime survivors that he was incarcerating who were both women as well as women of color, African American here in New Orleans. And the fact that they were equally powerless and that they were tokenized by a law and order community, by those people that were in charge of the prosecutor's office that say that, we're looking at increased time. We need increased time because of crime survivors, and never ask crime survivors what they themselves want. And so that was the movement that Court Watch NOLA had initiated 3 years ago. We have many different powerful partners with us. And immediately the district attorney's popularity fell by 11%. 3 people who he endorsed, who normally would absolutely have become elected officials, ended up failing to be elected. And just like the influence that people that inspire us, like Satana, have in looking at the prosecutors around her beforehand, we also looked at the movements that came before us. And we created something called a DA's Coalition, People's DA Coalition. And our People's DA Coalition was the first one in the Deep South. We had 15 different organizations that were a part of it, but we were also unique in that we put together crime survivors, formerly incarcerated and wrongfully incarcerated. In New Orleans, we have the highest wrongful incarceration rate in the whole entire country for any county or parish, above 300,000 people. And so just like that influence, we looked to other community groups. So we looked to New York and their prosecutors, their prosecutor coalition. And we looked to Philly and we saw what they did right. And we learned from their mistakes, and then we created our own. And so I encourage everybody, I'm gonna put my email in the chat. I encourage everyone to think about that as a model of actually holding our district attorneys accountable. In New Orleans, we have a bit of a complicated situation because we are still holding our progressive prosecutor accountable. We elected the first progressive prosecutor is, can people hear me? It sounds like Zoom is freezing up a little bit. Yeah. We elected the first progressive prosecutor that we have ever had in Orleans Parish. And this was such an incredible and huge win for us because the whole entire corrupt political machine in Louisiana turned against him. But we as a community had been educating people through our coalition and through the work that we had done and through the work that Fox and Rob have done. And we as a community have been educating people for really a decade about this stuff. And even though our prosecutor had absolutely no endorsements, zero and zip, there was one endorsement from a political official, and everyone supported his opponent. As far as the political machine in Louisiana, we still won that election. The problem is that, and this is what happens, and I know we're going to be talking about this later on, that it was a week after our prosecutor announced his campaign, the FBI started to investigate him on tax fraud charges. And so even though our district attorney was indicted and charged with federal tax fraud charges, so 11 counts, we as a community said, this is the prosecutor that we want. This is the reform prosecutor that we want, and we still elected him. The problem that we face now here in New Orleans is we are still keeping that DA accountable. He is far from perfect. The group that we're involved with, which is called the People's DA Coalition, has had 2 different forums where we ask questions directly to the prosecutor. And we make sure that the platform that we created as a coalition that he signed onto, that he's following that platform. So we're holding him accountable as we need to, but on the other hand, we're also protecting him from what may very well throw him out of office, which is a conviction on these federal tax fraud charges. And we know as a movement that the prosecutor can't be the movement, that we are the movement, and that our movement is deep and it is whole. But along the way, we need to do our homework too. And so we need to get all those people that did vote for the reform prosecutor, we need to make sure that they are talking to their neighbors about what is happening, so that if we do lose our prosecutor because of this federal conviction, and none of us believe that this federal conviction has really been brought about by anything except for politics. If we do lose him, we have to know that the movement is us, and that we continue to move, we continue to organize, and we continue to push to have the next reform prosecutor, because we cannot go back to where we were before. So I think that that's most of what I wanted to say. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that we in this movement have been traumatized. It is incredibly frightening to go up against entrenched power. Myself, I've been threatened about 4 or 5 times politically and publicly by this prosecutor. I am certainly not the only one. And we have to see the influence of those people around us and understand that we have to face that fear and understand that we ourselves are doing the right thing, and that we will actually see success and we will see reform, but the work is constant.
Thank you. District Attorney Sutana Deberry, what are some of the policy changes that you've put into effect that reflect this new approach to prosecution?
Thanks, Topher. Before I get started, I'm going to take the opportunity. Uzo Dubu said her mother told her that if people can pronounce Baryshnikov and Dostoevsky, they can pronounce her name. So just quickly, my first name is pronounced Sutana. So just for folks out there. And I really want to commend Fox and Rob. I'm glad Simone went after them and not me, because I think what they really indicate, I've seen time, and Fox and Rob and I are about the same age, and I think about everything that has happened to me since 1997. All the opportunities I had in my life, all the things I was able to accomplish that were robbed from that family. And really what we see from mass incarceration is just this tremendous waste of human potential. I mean, Fox and Rob are so dynamic, so intelligent. They speak so passionately. And what if they were speaking so passionately about something? What if they didn't have this experience and were able to, I don't know, reform Medicaid or change, fix climate change, right? Like we're taking people who could cure cancer and having them defend a system that can sometimes be indefensible. So having said that, I ran on a platform of really being accountable to the citizens of this community, because the dirty little secret of the criminal justice system is that not only are all the defendants Black and brown, but the victims are too. And so we don't talk about this cycle of victimization that creates defendants, right? People who have suffered emotionally, physically, have been the victims of domestic violence, of childhood sexual abuse, of childhood physical abuse, lowered opportunities, no access to education and healthcare, the things that really create criminal justice issues. And so how do we as a community hold people accountable when they break our social contract, right? We don't want people, we don't want people stealing from each other. We don't want people, selling drugs. We certainly don't want people committing violence against each other, right? But how do we do that in a manner that is fair and equitable and recognizes that there are a range of things that we can do as a community other than lock people up? And so that's what we've been trying to do here in this office, by really looking at the policies, and we are not colorblind. Colorblindness, I think, is how we got here. We are very clear that there are certain ways in which the law acts that disproportionately impacts people of color, low-income people. I grew up in rural North Carolina. There were plenty of white people who were in the same position economically as Black people. So I know that communities of color and poor communities suffer the impact of the criminal justice system. So how do we look at behaviors and know what is dangerous for our community, what is serious in our community, and what are ways in which we're just punishing people for having substance abuse problems, for being mentally ill, for having no place to sleep. And so what that looks like is that we are very aware of pretrial incarceration. We know the collateral consequences of sitting in jail awaiting trial. And while Americans watch Law and Order and CSI, and they think that everything going on down here at the courthouse is rape and murder and arson. Of the 30,000 cases, criminal cases that are filed in my jurisdiction every year, only 10% of them are serious or violent cases. So that means people are sitting in jail for peeing outside, for sleeping in the woods, for shoplifting, for any number of low-level things. And so we have tried to switch the focus to more serious crimes. We try to only keep people incarcerated pretrial who are a danger to themselves or others. And what that means is that the prosecutors in my office, for a great many offenses, we do not ask that that person be detained at all. And we generally, only for the most serious felonies, ask that somebody be held on bond. What it means in court is that we generally divert low-level offenses away from the criminal justice system. We have great community partners here who run substance abuse programs, who run mental health programs. We try to divert as many low-level drug offenses, things like shoplifting and trespassing and all of those things we try to divert away. So that the prosecutors in my office are really only focusing on cases in which there has been harm to a human victim. And I think, kind of another myth of the criminal justice system is that we're keeping everybody safe, right? Oh, that's not what we're doing. I don't remember who said was it Jami who said we're last responders? No, it was Simone, I guess, and her. She said we're last responders. I only get people once they've been arrested. Everything bad that could have happened to them in their lives has already happened. And here, our office comes and we are often a reminder, even for the victims, we're often a reminder of the worst day of their lives. And that's not what we want to be, right? What we want to be is the place where our community knows that we can hold people accountable, through a range of options. Unfortunately, as a society, for some of those folks, we still only have prison. If you murder somebody, you go into prison in every jurisdiction. Right? There's not a jurisdiction in the United States, but here in this office, sometimes there's an opportunity for restorative justice. Murder victims and the defendants accused of their murders were often members of the same community. We sometimes have people who are members of the same family. We've used restorative justice in this office for a young man who killed his grandfather. And the family knew that there had been issues between him and his grandfather, and they wanted the opportunity to welcome him home when he had done his time. But they couldn't figure out how to reintegrate him to the family. So we use restorative justice in that process, and that family is, throughout the time that young man is going to be incarcerated, is going to work with him to rebuild his place in the family. So we can be just as innovative on diverting cases from the criminal justice system and holding people accountable as we have been in locking people up. And so that's really what the policies in our office are, is just to only incarcerate people when it's absolutely necessary. And when it's not absolutely necessary, to divert those to places in the community that can provide what they need.
Thank you for that, District Attorney. And
That was so well said. Thank you for that. I'm thanking you too.
do you have a question for Fox?
I mean, other than when can I come to Durham Rob and I to come and share, but thank you for being able to have that open heart and understanding. And just really, to me, we use this terminology called progressive prosecutors. And what Rob and I are saying, I don't see nothing progressive most of these folks doing. They're just being fair. We're not looking for somebody to turn the system upside down. Right now, we just want someone in there that's going to do a fair job and bring forth justice in all matters. And that shouldn't be much to ask for. That should be, that's low-lying level achievements that we are seeking in our society. God forbid if we really wanted to talk about how it is that you all can stop being the last responders to situations. But I just think that the conversations that we're having now here today are so important for us to see a brighter, better way to carry out justice as we see it in America.
Well, let me say a couple things to that, really, Fox, right? So nothing that I do runs against the statutes of North Carolina. Everything that I do is contemplated by the law.
Right. Right.
And so I think people think of the law as a static thing that never changes. And that's not true, right? As a lawyer, we know that within the broad body of the law, there are different ways to interpret the law.
Yes.
And you can generally interpret the law in the way that gets you to where you want to be. That's why I became a lawyer, right? That's why a little Black girl like me from Hamlet, North Carolina, saw the Constitution, like Mona said, as just this bright, shining document, right? Until I got to law school, I understood how it had been used. But when you read it on its face, it is
a masterpiece.
A masterpiece, right? It is an inspiring document. So I would say that's the first thing I would say, is that the law is up to interpretation.
Yes.
And everything I do lands solidly within the laws of North Carolina. The second thing I would say is that I am a Black woman, right? And when we were in the waiting room, Rob and Topher were talking about being the only men on this panel. But what we know as Black women is that we experience crime up close and personal, right? Not just as the victims of crime, right? But as the sisters, the mothers, the daughters, the cousins. I was at my family reunion recently and was reminded that I've had 3 cousins in the same sibling group who were murdered on the streets of DC, right? We're the ones who find bail money, right? We're the ones who keep if you look at time, you see Fox holding down that whole family for 2 decades, right? so to me, this is personal,
Yes.
right? I am a member of this community. I live here. I
Yes.
raised my children here. And so to look down upon the people in my community, you know, would be for me a disservice to what we're trying to build here. So.
Mhm.
And I
I'm gonna
had-
just put my tattoo, Deberry tattoo right here on my shoulder.
I just
Thank
had
you for your service.
Mhm.
I just had two follow-ups for you, District Attorney. One is going to be a question that's coming in from the audience. I know but I think it's timed perfectly for the things you've commented here on. And the others, one is a question I have is how have your partners in the legal system there responded to the efforts that you are making happen in the prosecutor's office? Often you hear prosecutors talk about the pushback they'll get from the police or the sheriff and the pushback they'll get from this other arm of the legal system. How have the partners reacted to the changes you've made in the prosecutor's office?
That's a good question. So I am the elected district attorney. People voted for me. I didn't just walk up in here and sit in this seat and declare myself district attorney, right? So I live in a community that, as Simone has talked about, community has been organizing for decades around criminal justice reform or criminal legal system reform. And so they had seen changes everywhere but in the prosecutor's office. And so do I have pushback? Absolutely, right? Often system actors think it is their job to preserve the system, not to serve the people. And so I have had some pushback, but generally in this community, we're all trying to work towards the same goal, which is to incarcerate fewer of our fellow citizens, to raise fewer people who would be in danger from the criminal legal system, and to be a community in which we all prosper. Now, I'm just one of 42 district attorneys in North Carolina, and some of the other ones have not necessarily. I was asked by a colleague if I was a Crip, so even while I live in a community that's trying to work to do better, everybody doesn't live here, right? And so, I do face some pushback, but again, I have 100% discretion. In the North Carolina Constitution gives the prosecutor 100% discretion in how they move cases forward. And while I'm sitting in this seat, we are going to use 100% of that discretion.
And the follow-up question that's coming from the audience was, what does a prosecutor like yourself, what do you need from the activist community to help continue reframing the system?
I need a new legislature. I mean, it's not just me. Yes, while I'm sitting here, every criminal case in Durham County belongs to me, but it's only every case in Durham County, right? There are 99 other counties in North Carolina in which people could also benefit from the fair and equitable administration of justice. And what I think people could do is, well, one, I've got a lot of accountability in my community. Simone talked about accountability. Jami talked about accountability. There are people in these comments right now blowing me up who, don't feel any problem coming to me when they think that we are not doing what we said we would do or what they think the people elected us to do. So you can always hold that person's feet to the fire. Fox said the people have a lot of power. The people have a tremendous amount of power, especially in local elections. And so you can organize people. You can educate people on what the district attorney does. I mean, I've been in the full-time practice of law now for 27 years. And before I ran for district attorney, if our district attorney had walked past me in the grocery store with a t-shirt on that said Durham County District Attorney, I would not have known who he was. So that just gives you an idea of how really important it is for you to know who sits in the seat. Organize within your community, organize nationally. You know, I am a Johnny come lately to this movement. There are people who have been working on this for decades, and that's how I got here. And so hold us accountable. Elect more prosecutors who respond to your community and what you say, what you need, and work for larger change within the political system.
Thank you for that. Jami, let's get you back in here. You know, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, a lot of attention, rightly so, placed on policing. Why focus on prosecutors given this moment that we're all kind of drilled into policing?
Thank you, Topher. I think George Floyd's murder catalyzed momentum that we've never seen before in our country. When we had protests in the streets in all 50 states and internationally, it opened eyes and has led to a discussion that we haven't really had before. We're reckoning in ways that we haven't before around issues of racial justice. And while so much of the conversation has been about policing, there's been a couple things to me that were a shift after he was murdered. One was that in these protests, the demand wasn't for arrest those officers and hold them accountable. Like, that's not what the signs said. The sign said, defund the police, tear down the system that enables these things to continue to happen. I think there's a recognition that, while not to minimize the importance of accountability, and I know George Floyd's family had to feel some sense of relief when there was a guilty verdict for former officer Derek Chauvin, but we've had guilty verdicts before, and that has not stopped the continued killing of Black people by law enforcement. So what, to me, shifted is a call to address the system that has enabled this to continue to happen. And to address that system requires more than just a focus on policing. Policing is important. It is the first way community members come into contact with this system, but it certainly is not the only way. And certainly, I would argue, is not the most influential way that determines what happens to them. Police begin the process, but prosecutors, and in their power, have the determination. They can end it right there. They can dismiss a case at the point of arrest and end that involvement right there. And everything else, other decision that's made, whether or not the case is charged, whether it's charged as a misdemeanor or felony, whether or not you seek to have that person held in jail while their case is pending, all of those decisions, and even though that decision is usually by a magistrate or a judge, they are deeply influenced by what the prosecutor asks. So in this moment, when we are looking at how do we take money out of a system that has, and you look at so many county and city budgets and find nearly half or more of the budgets go to policing and courts in these punitive responses, how do we take those resources and shift them to the things that we know actually will create public safety, create thriving communities? We know what the drivers of violence are. They are isolation, their inability to meet one's economic needs, their exposure to trauma. And by putting money into a system that actually only exacerbates those things, that we're pouring gas on the fire. The call now is we need to radically change how we are responding. And it's time to fundamentally change the system. And that doesn't happen without a focus on prosecutors. And so I personally have always heard those calls as it's not just about police, it's about the system. So how do we fundamentally change the system? And because prosecutors play such a powerful role, that has to be part of the change.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Fox and Rob, what made you want to tell your story in such an intimate fashion? Oh, okay, good, right. Right. What made you want to tell your story in such an intimate, fashion in the way you did in the movie Time, and letting the world see what those 21 years felt like, and in such a close proximity? Why did you want to tell the story that way?
Well, I think for me, it was not just telling the story that way. It was, I could not believe that this had happened to our family. I just did not believe that people were really treated this way in our judicial system. And had it not happened to me, I don't think I ever would have believed it. And so our documentation initially started just to show that if this is happening to us, I only can imagine what is happening to folks that are, 2 nickels poorer than us, to folks who have a little less education than us. And so our intent was just to be able to document, to make it real for people so that they could see what is happening. And then we always said that this is so crazy that we're going to one day make a movie about it. But before that day happened, we look up and it's almost 2 decades later and we are still in the system for taking $5,000. And we, Rob says the 13th had come out and Rob says, baby, maybe if we make a documentary, we can begin to get some leadway on our story. And maybe, we've got to let people know that we're here, because those that know the injustice that had happened to us were unwilling to do anything about it. DA Deberry, we went back to the district attorney, had one of our spiritual leaders in our community go and speak to the district attorney in our matter and ask him about reconsidering the sentence that he had given my husband. And his response to our minister was, I sent him to Angola to die. And that is what I intend for him to do. Do you hear me? This is the heart of the people that are overseeing justice in the state of Louisiana, and not just the state of Louisiana, but all over our country. And so by the time we decided to do the documentary, God sent us the amazing Garrett Bradley, and who was working on another project called Alone. And I was like, Garrett, listen, you got to talk to those people, because we've got to tell this story on that level with the New York Times. And she did. And we were just grateful that the New York Times was willing to allow our voices to be heard. We thought it would help us get Rob home. And as God would have it, we were able to get him home through clemency before we were ever able to get the documentary out into the world. So to me, it ended up working out better. There are no mistakes, because rather than having other people see that we are just continuing to fight for 2 decades, that they can see what happens when we fight. We win, we win, we win.
And if I could add to what Fox just mentioned, and that, thank you. The piece of that would have to be that the story that is told through time is not just me and Fox's story. This is the story of more than 2.3 million other families that are suffering similar circumstances as that of our own. Unfortunately, it's just that they did not have nearly the resources that we had at our disposal. And if you think about that, just the fact that, as was made mention earlier, Fox and I are both educated people. We had life, we had an ambition, we had all those things. We had dreams and all of those things before the crime ever took place, before the prosecution happened, and before the conviction came down. But with all of that said, there are so many other people that are languishing away in our prisons all across America. And they are in those places because of overzealous prosecution, through excessive prosecution that is happening.
Wrongful prosecution that is happening.
Right. I mean, these are situations where we just had a person just return home recently that we've been able to get. We've been fighting for this person for over 20 years. They got convicted for having a joint. And because of habitual offender statuses that happen, they set aside set aside the sentencing and sought to give the guy a life sentence. But he was sentenced to life in prison for a marijuana stick. And then it's funny that even during the period of time that we were fighting to get him out, you have states all across the country that are legalizing marijuana, and they're selling marijuana like they're selling candy out of a store.
Actually, it's selling better than candy.
But you still have people rotting away in our prisons for the same exact thing. So there's just so much to be done here, so much work to be done here. So what we were hopeful to do with the telling of time would be to tell that these stories do exist, and they are happening in all of these little murky corners all around our country.
And also that we have the power to change our situation and to rise up against any situation that is oppressing us.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Simone, so, what are some of the ways prosecutors can engage the community that that helps to contribute to the reframing of how they do their work?
Thanks, Topher. One of the things I wanted to mention, and I've been trying to keep up with the chats and also the questions as well, which have been just really incredible. I want to just highlight some of the work that is happening in states like New York, where they just passed, a couple of years ago, they passed a prosecutor ethics commission, which actually investigates prosecutors when there is a complaint submitted about them by the community to the commission. They had to fight long and hard to get it through the legislature. And then after they got it through the legislature, it was challenged by a number of district attorneys. And then they had to repass the bill, and they did it. This is sort of what I was saying before when I was saying that, the work is just continual and perpetual, and we need to have a lot of people there in order to provide support for that work. We in Louisiana are trying to do the same thing. We have a prosecutor ethics commission where we, with the legislation, we are able to, we're able to appoint people to the commission that will make decisions on which complaints will be investigated or not. And the people that we wrote into our legislation involved formerly incarcerated, involved criminal defense attorneys, involved, members of the community from religious communities, right? And we wrote that legislation. We haven't gotten it passed. We keep pushing it. And I think a lot of the questions that have been in the chat is, where can we go from here? We know that the prosecutors themselves are not the movement, that we are the movement. So how do we make sure that we create institutional structures in the institutional structure that reform will continue? And so that's what I really offer when it comes to rechanging the conversations. We've asked our district attorney, Jason Williams, to support that legislation. As a prosecutor, once you have that reform prosecutor in, what you then have is you have a prosecutor who can push and challenge things in the legislature as a prosecutor, and that changes the dialogue. And we need to actually act on that before we don't have our progressive prosecutors in our office. The other thing I also wanted to mention, there's been a lot of conversation about conservative backlash, and it's really important to mention that, there has been people ask how they can work around conservative backlash, how they can push back. I think that the most important thing to remember is that those people that are talking about law and order, and those people that are really responsible for the conservative backlash, they're tokenizing people. They haven't spoken to crime survivors. And we ourselves can speak to crime survivors. This goes back to Satana's statement before of the generational trauma. And we know that there's an exchange between the defendant community and the crime survivor community. If you're a crime survivor and you don't receive trauma help, and you don't receive resources from district attorney's offices, and the good majority of people don't, you're gonna be turning to substance abuse and be rearrested. You are taking the law into your hands to be rearrested. And we, in our communities of reform, when we're pushing back, we need to actually embrace those people that have been the victim of generational trauma and who are now crime survivors and oftentimes defendants, and we have to make them into our movement, because we cannot tokenize people the same way that the law and order conservatives do. We need to do different.
Thank you for that. And then one more question for District Attorney, and then we'll start to address some of the questions that we've gotten from the audience, which are great. What are some of the biggest challenges to implementing policy changes that you've encountered, especially on the pendulum of reducing mass incarceration and that center on racial equity? What are some of the biggest challenges you faced?
I would say the biggest challenge is caseload. We hear a lot about public defenders having, these exorbitant caseloads, having 300 or 400 cases on their caseload. My prosecutors also have 300 or 400 cases on their caseload. And what that means is that either you pay attention to each case and the system gets so slow that everybody's upset with you because the system is slow, or you speed it up and everybody's upset with you because you're not looking at each case. And so we just, I think, one, we criminalize a lot of things that are substance abuse, substance use disorder, mental health issues. There are just a lot of things that don't need to be in the criminal code. I think that's the first thing. And we have, again, like I said, there are system actors who think it is their job to make sure that victims get justice, even when victims are asking for something different. Justice is like art. Everybody thinks they know it when they see it, and they want kind of their own justice. I don't have a ton of pushback inside my office, but there's also just a day-to-day of I am one person, and unless I can clone myself and send myself to court, I've got prosecutors who are making individual decisions on each case based on kind of how they hear what the policy is. And that's a real challenge because everybody doesn't hear it the same. One of the big challenges of the criminal justice system is there's so many little individual decisions that add up to the same kind of systemic wrongs. And everybody will say, well, in this case, I couldn't do what you asked me to do because this case was just so this or so that. And I think also we don't really focus on, back to Simone's point about law and order, we don't really focus on the most serious things, right? We don't focus on sexual assault. We don't focus on the abuse of children. We don't solve shootings, right? We don't do the things that if we were really focused on the most serious crimes, if all my prosecutors did was prosecute serious crimes, our system would work better because they wouldn't be worried with the thousands of small things that they also have to do.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So I think we're going to now start looking at some of the questions that we've gotten from you all, which are fantastic. And I'm going to start, let's see here. Start with this one.
Can I chime in on this point? Just I just want to add to what DA Deberry just said, because it's such an important point. That this concept of looking for justice in a case-by-case approach. And I think I just want to add to it the importance of thinking about systemic justice and systemic injustice. And so when we think about systemic injustice, then we have to step back and recognize the role history has played in what we see in our system. I think Rob alluded to this when he talked about the 13th Amendment, that we have this 13th Amendment that abolished slavery except as punishment for crime. And so we can't divorce by saying we're going to pursue justice in these individual cases. I'm just going to look at my case. And this really resonates with me because as a prosecutor, that's what I was trying to do, But if we do that, what we don't recognize, we're doing it in the context of a system that is full of injustice. So we can't do that tree to focus on the trees without acknowledging that the forest is on fire. And so it requires us, when we put it in the context of the history that we're in, of why we see so many Black people in our system, then that requires that case-by-case approach to justice is not going to work. It's not. We're going to have to think of new approaches, fundamentally different ways of responding to harm. So I wanted to add that point because I think the historical context of how we got here, we have to keep top of mind because it makes us have to do something different than justice in each case.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So here's one question that we've gotten from the audience. Okay, it says, So basically, the person asked a question, and open this up to anybody on the panel. Should there be a way to hold prosecutors accountable for the things they do when evidence is withheld or innocent people are prosecuted? Should there be some type of state commission to hold them accountable? And they said that question was for Simone, but I think anyone can respond to it.
So absolutely, that's the way that we have to institutionalize this reform. We have to make sure that after our progressive prosecutors are no longer in office, that we actually have these commissions and that the commissions are staffed by us. So we have to build that into the legislative function beforehand. I mentioned before, New York has just successfully passed this. Salt Lake City, I think, also had a movement to also pass one of these, but they are incredibly rare. And for a prosecutors movement that is becoming as strong as ours, and in which we have managed to elect as many progressive prosecutors as we have at this point, and that frankly, the issue of wrongful conviction has become a mainstream conversation piece that conservatives and progressives both react against. It is unfathomable that we do not have more of our movements that are pushing for prosecutorial ethics commissions. And just so people understand what that is, that means where your regular disciplinary commission, like your bar association disciplinary commission, is not working, and usually it does not. So when you send in complaints about when a prosecutor has done wrong, missing evidence, railroading someone, you know, oftentimes these bar association disciplinary commissions will not do anything. We're talking about an entirely new commission that is really stacked with the people that it needs to be stacked with, and proper investigators and proper resources that will then look at prosecutors. The one in Louisiana that we have pushed for is allowed to censor, suspend with or without salary, remove the district attorney from office, and retire the district attorney involuntarily. So just imagine if we were able to institutionalize that power within our government, and then we were able to have formerly incarcerated and crime survivors who understand the fact that trauma recovery would change absolutely everything, and that we're putting huge amounts of money into things like crime cameras, which don't work, and no money into trauma recovery for crime survivors. Just imagine if we actually had educated people stacking those commissions, and we've institutionalized that in the law, and they cannot take that away from us. I mean, it would be just a game changer. I want to highlight Bill Bastock as well, who's been pretty active in a lot of the chat for a lot of the work that he did in New York. He's by far the only person. There's a huge reform movement, but he's done a lot of really incredible, essential work.
Anyone else want to chime in on that?
I would probably just add to what Simone is saying is that how in the world has this even been acceptable for us? To have prosecutors to knowingly do wrong and we not have anything in place to hold them accountable? To me, the people that are on this Zoom call are some of the most committed in this movement. And so maybe if this has not been a strong push for us before, because I know that the forest is burning, then maybe at this point, some of us can take some of the capacity that we may have. But as citizens, it just should be unacceptable for us to not hold someone accountable who holds everybody accountable. And when we take that position, then it's not just, oh, we need this ethics committee. It is a demand and not an ask. This is a requirement and not a request. And that is what all of this movement is about, is saying that we have identified the community. We have identified what is not proper, and we are demanding that it is fixed. And prosecutorial accountability is that thing.
And I just want to underline how few avenues we have. So in New Orleans, our prosecutor literally committed fraud. You look at what the statute is, you look at what he did, he committed fraud. There was a complaint that was sent in to our Attorney General, who is incredibly conservative, by a member of our community whose name is Kim Ford, who runs a group called Community Recallers. The complaint was sent into the Attorney General's office about this act of fraud, and nothing was happened. There was a complaint sent into the U.S. Attorney's office. Here, the federal prosecutors over this level of fraud, nothing happened. And so that is why it is so essential, like what Fox had said, that we managed to bring teeth to this part of the work, and that we actually demand that these kind of commissions occur.
Thank you for that. What role should the media play?
Topher, you have to answer that question. You haven't answered any questions yet.
Right. That's a good one, Simone.
All right. Okay. All right. So I think that what a lot of people in the press are going through in this current moment is trying to look themselves in the mirror a bit about how they've dealt with police, particularly police, prosecutors by extension. I think that our local newsrooms deal with prosecutors too infrequently, only when they issue press releases and only when kind of on their own terms. Prosecutors are not scrutinized to the degree that they should be, in my own opinion. And often whenever something comes out of the cop shop or the prosecutor shop, it's just taken as gospel. And mass, when it comes to our local police shops, they print every word that's in a police report as if it's the truth. And so I think that has to be just a change in the way reporters and editors, when you think about local media shops, your local newspaper, your local television station, a lot of those editors have been there for a long time. And they got some real legacy attitudes about police, about prosecutors, about the whole thing. And that all just has to be upended. I think that the same level of scrutiny editors place on me when I bring to them my notes from when I'm in the community talking to people, and they're like, well, how do we know this guy's telling the truth? We got to think like that.
Right.
And so that's, I don't know how you really make that change happen. I happen to work at a place where that level of skepticism is kind of built into the cake, it's baked in. But in most newsrooms, that's not the case. And I don't really know how you change it, because I know as a reporter, when I was in Jacksonville or, in Montgomery, Alabama, where I was doing this type of reporting, I faced that level of kind of skepticism about my reporting from my editor all the time. And it was about this idea about who they believed, the police versus people in the community. So I don't know if that really answers the question about the role the media plays. I think they play a key role, and they have to be more critical.
Yeah, Topher, I would say, it's a good point about the police report. I have just learned as a prosecutor that what the media reports as kind of the facts is whatever's in the police report. And that creates all kinds of issues. I wish they just wouldn't do that, because just take, for example, if the police arrest 4 people on a murder, I've got to prove that they're not guilty. But the reporting is reported, like once the police have got you, it's over, right? And so I have families who then come in and say, well, you got them. How come it's taking you? How come they got off? Or I was like, well, there was no evidence, right? And, this person was just in the car. So I think it creates a lot of problems for victims as well, just the way we think about it in the United States. And I know there's going to be a whole panel on this later, but just kind of to tie the media question and the commission together, I got a lot of accountability, right? As a Black woman, the media, if I miss work one day, the local beat reporter is calling my office saying they say she don't come to work, right? So some of us get way more accountability, and both from our professional associations and the media than others of us.
That's right.
I wanted to just
go ahead, Simone.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say, we at Court Watch NOLA, my organization, we don't do anything without the media. What we do is we collect data, we talk to whistleblowers, we make public records requests, and then we go straight to the media. We have never revealed a whistleblower's identity to the media ever. You do not need to do it. You need to ensure that you have the trust of people that work inside the system to make sure that all the nightmares that they have been living with are able to come out. But we actually see the media as part of our organization, because we know that unless we actually highlight half of the things that are happening, that it will just be unknown. And I am without scruples when it comes to educating the media. I will talk to somebody's boyfriend or girlfriend in order to influence them as a journalist if I do not think that they have the right approach. I think that it takes a community to educate prosecutors, to educate those people inside the criminal legal system. And I think it also takes a community to educate reporters as well. And there needs to be consequences behind their actions if they're tokenizing people and not actually having thoughtful dialogue on some of these incredibly difficult questions and problems that we're trying to discuss now.
That's right. And I think that changing the way prosecutors see reporters, and that they do need that education piece, as Simone is mentioning. You know, you guys don't know, me and Simone have talked about a number of stories together, and our conversations get deep. We on the phone 45 minutes talking just about the details of the story before we've even committed that we're going to write a thing or do a thing. We're just trying to understand what the thing is and will it work for both of us. And that's just a sea change in how reporters do their job and how prosecutors view media, and how reporters need to view prosecutors and review, see the whole system. So it's an important element of this, because once that newspaper hits the morning and everybody reads it, then that becomes the thing. Just like, District Attorney Deberry said, now it's just the truth because it was in the newspaper. And so that is really key to fix. Even something as simple as adding attribution to what the police say. Police claim, police said, like, instead of just a period at the end of the sentence, like, it is the truth. Like, that's just a thing that has to change.
Not everybody's like Topher as a journalist.
Yes. And I just want to chime in that if of the many lessons that I hope that we take from George Floyd's murder, one of them, I hope, is not just for the media, but also for prosecutors to read police reports differently. Because but for Darnella Frazier, what we would have learned about what happened to George Floyd was that he had a medical incident at the time of his arrest, because that is what the police report said. So it's not just media that needs to be more critical of the ways police report what happens on the street, but prosecutors and all those who have influence in the system. That is a lesson I hope we all take. We just cannot take police reports at face value. Just like we require corroboration for anybody else, just like as Topher was saying, being questioned about, well, why should we believe this person? Especially when you're in a position of power and you have authority, you have a taxpayer paid for badge and gun, then there's a heightened level of scrutiny we should put to the information that is being put out.
Yeah, they do that. That happens anytime you unpack any of the big events that we know about police encounters, whether we're talking about Eric Gardner or we're talking about Walter Scott, the police report is always janky. It's always a kind of a mischaracterization of what actually happened. So that's key. So thank you for saying that. So moving on to another question here. We have a good question coming in. I saw this earlier. Okay. So this is coming in from our audience. Where I live, a lot of our diversion programs, drug court, mental health court, etc., are DA run and reserved for felonies, which often limits the number of people who can get diverted. Have any of you explored pre-booking diversion, where essentially police at the point of contact can divert a person to services? If so, how did it get buy-in from all the players, i.e. police, prosecutors, and the community?
I would say a couple things. One, actually, diversion should be used in felony cases. It should be used in the most serious cases. That is kind of, I think, best practice. is that you want the people who have the most need, sometimes, especially in drug cases, in a diversionary court.
Check your mic, District Attorney. I think it's
Oh,
got.
I'm sorry. I said uh, kind of best practice for diversion is to have sometimes the most serious cases. So you do want felonies in diversion court. I think the way the adversarial system is set up is that these cases have to be these diversion programs have to be prosecutor led, because it is the state that is bringing the charges. And it is the prosecutor who is making the decision on how those charges move forward. I think for low-level cases, you can do a lot more than just divert a case. And we can do a whole thing on diversion and what cases are best for diversion. Here in Durham, we have a pre-arrest, and there are lots of communities around the country that have law enforcement assisted diversion. Here in Durham, we have a pre-arrest diversion program that was voluntary until our previous chief put it in their general orders. So now a patrol officer has the opportunity to send somebody to divert a misdemeanor case to a diversion program that's kind of run outside of the criminal justice system. So they never even turn the charges in. They essentially never get booked. And if that person completes all of the pre-arrest diversion, then they're never charged. But there is a lot of room in the system for post-arrest diversion. And I think that's, there's lots of opportunities for diversion, but there's several places within the process where diversion is possible and is a good idea. But I think just because of the way our system is set up, they generally the prosecutor has to agree to do them once charges have been filed. Jami, you want to jump in? You or Simone want to jump in?
I'll just chime in that, and there, in fact, it's something we're doing now. The model doesn't, while the prosecutor definitely has to, because they hold that power, that charging power, so they gotta make the decision. There are many jurisdictions where then what happens is the person is diverted outside the system. And so they are paired with a community-based organization. I think I saw a question about this in the chat earlier. Is there a way that community-based organizations can be more involved in things like diversion? And
we don't run it. I'm sorry.
Right.
I wanted to make clear that my office
I
doesn't do the day-to-day running of the diversion program. Community-based organizations do that.
Okay, good. I do think there are offices where it is housed inside the DA's office. So when you say DA led, I think that can be an impression. So, so yes, it's important. I think that's a real key way community members can engage and to be those places where, yes, we all agree mental health issues, poverty-based issues, substance use issues don't belong in the system. We're here, use us as a resource instead of bringing people into the system.
So I wanted to just mention in New Orleans, we do have pre-arrest diversion. It's for low-level crimes. Certainly there is not enough people that are actually placed in this program. It is mostly with tourists. It's specifically in the French quarters where there's a lot of homeless people that that are out on the sidewalk. And the way that, going back to the original question, how did people get convinced to do it? Business owners were talking about how there was this revolving door and people were just let out of jail. And, this basic conversation piece, which is, yeah, people need help. There needs to be real help that's actually provided people on the street. And that's what has to be true for everyone when it comes to pre-arrest diversion. There's also an incredible group started by Sujatha out in California called Impact Justice that do pre-arrest diversion when it comes to restorative justice as well. That's really important that folks know. I mean, restorative justice is a huge alternative. A lot of the times, I think that more conservative non-reform district attorneys are even open to the idea of restorative justice, where crime survivors are given the victim trauma and the trauma recovery that they need and are put in restorative circles, and they're the ones that call the shots. And in many, we have one that we're trying to start here in New Orleans. Our district attorney has absolutely signed on to it. And, you know, incarceration is off the table. It's not even an option. So a crime survivor knows that before they get involved in the process.
And so we got just a few minutes left. This has been fantastic. I think I really like this question. I found as a reporter, this area of the legal system is not explored a lot by reporters because it's very tough. There's a lot of justified confidentiality around it. But how can young people get involved in forcing reform and change of how prosecutors deal with juveniles in the system? How can young voices get involved?
Well, I will start off by saying I have a daughter who is a rising junior in high school, and she is part of the Southern Coalition for Social Justice's Youth Advisory Council, and she's been working very hard in our community to get school resource officers out of schools and to really educate her peers on the criminal legal system. And, you know, she and I talk a lot about kind of our opposing roles in this society, but, you know, there's lots of opportunities for the kids to be involved, I think, especially around school resource officers and being heard, not just within their schools, but with their parents, right? And, you know, talking to their parents about what they think. You know, I didn't even know that my daughter she became active, not because of my work, but because when she was in middle school, a kid's phone got missing in after school, and the school resource officer questioned her about it. And she, I don't know, she's maybe 11, and the fear that she still has around that incident, I didn't even know about it until I heard her on a podcast talking about it, and why she got involved with this work. So kids have really powerful stories, and you should tell them. And I think you should especially tell them to your parents and ask them to do something.
I felt like I saw a few other people with some thoughts on this.
One thought that I wanted to share is that one, I'd like to be able to give acknowledgement to the local law schools here, particularly Loyola University, because at its leadership, they have been quite active in terms of getting their law students engaged in what is being coined as movement lawyering. But I think to answer your question one better, Topher, would have to be that if we are hopeful to get young people involved in this work, we have to invite them to be a part of this work. Fox and I on a regular basis are visiting our local universities here, as well as those that are abroad, and are always working to invite people, young people, into this movement, because like with anything else, this is not a sprint, but a marathon to the end. If we're hopeful to end slavery in our country, then we're going to have to be responsible for educating the next wave of leadership, and that is our young people. So we have not only a duty, but an obligation as movement leaders ourselves to invite, to open the doors, if you would, to this process, to our younger people. Because if we're hopeful that this work will continue when we're long dead and gone, that it's only going to be through the passing on of those responsibilities and those teachings to our young people that we can hope to achieve that at the end.
And then I think we lead by example, right? We can talk all day and tell our children Oh my goodness. We can tell our children all kind of things, but at the end of the day, don't tell me, show me. And that's what Rob and I have tried to do in the lives of our 6 sons. And just being able to empower our children to know that they are important and they do have the power to make a change. In our matter, as we were working toward freedom for our family, it was not a celebrity that came and helped us. It was not a national organization that came and helped us. It was me and our 6 sons constantly grinding, doing the work, making the phone calls, sharing our story, and being able to be an example to show that we were not the people that deserve the 60 sentence that our family got as a unit. So all of those things, empowering them to know that the change that we needed for our family was in our own hands. And that's a lot of what our children, I think, are not getting, is that we keep putting these carrots in front of them, but all the power that we need is already in us, every last one of us. And it's in our children. And what I love most about our children is that they don't have the hangups that adults have. We some scary suckers. Oh, we scared of losing these good jobs and these fancy titles and the public accolades. We might not get invited to the next social party, but our children are free of that job. And with that freedom comes a level of sacrifice and a level of power that adults don't know. And so we saw them when they were invited. They were all in the streets in 50 states across this country and internationally, all 2020. And so we see when we invite them what the power that they possess can bring forth. And so I'm excited about what our young people are doing, and just honored to be able to bear witness in my lifetime, the fearlessness, the not accepting no as an answer that our young people are exhibiting. And I think we're gonna see more of it. I'm optimistic. I got my popcorn, I'm ready.
Well, I don't see any better way to end this than on that note. And this has been a true honor. Thank you all for inviting me to do this. And I hope that everyone in the audience were really able to note all of these wonderful gems that this panel has been able to draw for you. And I know that I can speak for all of them and say that if you have continued questions and interests, you know, their means of communication are available. You research them, you can find out how to reach them via email, etc. Reach out to them, ask your questions. There's a lot of questions in this chat that we weren't able to get to. I'm sorry for that. But please do reach out to each of the panelists and get your questions in front of them and learn from them. With that, I don't know who I need to hand this off to. Is it you, Jami? Like who do I give this to?
Topher, we are now going to take a 15-minute break. So we really hope you will all come back and join us for panel 2. It will be just as an amazing of a discussion. Thank you all.